Moscow is being forced to cut some non-military spending this month amid a collapse in oil and gas revenues and a growing deficit. The Financial Times reports even a brief surge in revenues in July did not help the situation. With a strong ruble, lower oil prices and slowing growth, the budget hole is widening. According to FT, non-priority items will be cut from unprofitable sanatoriums and football clubs to some infrastructure projects. Senator Anatoly Artamonov estimated the effect at up to 2 trillion rubles. The funds are planned to be transferred to defense and security, but in fact to the war. Military spending has doubled and even tripled in some months since 2022. A risky strategy, FT sources admit. Oil and gas revenues for January to August fell by 20%, and the deficit for the first half of the year reached 4.9 trillion rubles or $53 billion, with a plan of 0.5% of GDP. At the same time, economic costs are growing. A shortage of personnel, disruptions in cross-border payments, accelerated inflation. Railways are overloaded with the turn to the east. The coal industry is suffering its largest losses since the 1990s. At the WEF, Putin said Russia can afford a larger deficit. Silvanov reported that he was preparing proposals to fill the budget. But in reality, there are two supports: borrowing and the National Welfare Fund. Half of the National Welfare Fund has already been spent. Part of the assets abroad are frozen, so it is more profitable for the authorities to borrow than to eat up the remainder. The illusion of there's enough money for everything is over. As Alexandra Prokopenko from Carnegie notes, now the authorities are forced to set priorities, and the first to be cut will be civil spending. In practice, this means poorer regions, frozen projects, and a growing dependence of the budget on debt and commodity prices. In these circumstances, it is expected that public protests against the government will intensify. Even revolution is no exception. Earlier, media reported that US President Donald Trump demanded that Europe completely abandon Russian oil and punish China for financing the Russian military machine. As The Guardian reports, the head of the Oval Office called on European leaders to completely stop buying Russian oil, as well as to increase economic pressure on China in order to punish it for financing Russia's military actions. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron announced following the talks of the Coalition of the Willing that Trump had agreed to strengthen sanctions against Russia if the Kremlin regime continues to refuse real peace talks. According to the French leader, Europe would also impose additional sanctions. It was in this context that this was voiced in our conversation with President Trump, the French president said. In turn, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky noted after a conversation with allies that everyone has the same vision, that the Russian Federation is dragging out the negotiation process, so there should be increased pressure. According to the head of state, the European Union and Japan are currently working on new sanctions measures against the aggressor country.
Tens of thousands of people protested in Nepal's capital Monday after authorities decided to block most social media platforms including Facebook, X, and YouTube, saying that the companies had failed to register and submit to government oversight. According to Associated Press, protesters pushed through barbed wires in Kathmandu and forced riot police to retreat as they surrounded the parliament building. Police fired tear gas and water cannon but were outnumbered and sought safety in the parliament complex. The situation stayed tense and the government announced a curfew for Monday around Parliament, the government secretariat, presidential house, and key parts of the city. About 24 social network platforms widely used in Nepal were repeatedly given notices to register officially in the country, the government said. Those which failed to register have been blocked since last week. TikTok, Viber, and 3 other platforms have registered and operate without interruption. The move by the authorities came as the government sent a bill for a debate in Parliament that wants to ensure that social platforms are properly managed, responsible and accountable. It includes asking the companies to appoint a liaison office or point in the country. The bill has been widely criticized as a tool for censorship and punishing government opponents who voice their protests online. Rights groups have called it an attempt by the government to curb freedom of expression and violate fundamental rights.
Thank you.